What's up, y'all? Another Bible study, Bible reading, John 19. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him, whipped him, and I can't even imagine how bad they did him, how dirty they did him. Likely 39 or 40 lashes, 39 or 40 hits with the whip. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and put a purple robe on him. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And to give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Jesus then came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold, the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me, unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who has delivered me to you has a greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat him down at the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold, your king." So they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he then handed him over to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew, Golgotha. Like I said in one of my other videos, the place of a skull, it was supposed to be a rock that looked like a skull. And through the process of petrification, bones can turn into rock. And so that may have been one of the skulls of the giants, one of the Nephilim, the fallen angel seed, the seed of Satan, that he was crucified on top of. And that goes back to the beginning of the Bible, when it said, "The seed of the woman, he shall crush your head." Talking about the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. "He shall crush your head." and you shall bruise his heel. There they crucified him, and with him 2 other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Therefore many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part for every soldier, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. Now a seamless garment, those are very difficult to create, very difficult to make, and that's what the high priest wore, and that's what he was wearing. And they didn't rip it because they didn't want to ruin it. It had no seam, so they cast lots for it. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, to decide whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture. They divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. And that's written in Psalm 22. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus then saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, I'm pretty sure that was John, he said to his mother, woman, behold, your son. Speaking of John. Then he said to the disciple, behold, your mother. From that hour the disciple took her into his own household. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished to fulfill the scripture, said, I am thirsty. A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, when he said it is finished, a lot of people take that and say, the law is done away with, the law is finished. But if you go back a verse, it says, after this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished to fulfill the scripture, and then he said, it is finished. His work, the salvation. Then the Jews, because it was the day of the preparation, the day before the Sabbath, the day before Passover. See, the days start in evening time when the sun goes down. So the Passover started at night. So then the Jews, because it was the day of the preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken. so they wouldn't be able to hold themselves up anymore and breathe anymore, and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true. Speaking of John, I believe. And he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you also may believe. For these things came to pass to fulfill the scripture. Not a bone of him shall be broken. That's in one of the Psalms. And again another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they pierced. And that's also going to be fulfilled in the end times when he appears in the sky, I believe, and they look on him who they pierced. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. That's the end of chapter 19. God bless you guys.